McGallagher to Stokes, who's onside. 1-0.
Here's Sims. It's a good serve this from Southampton. They could finish the job here. It's Shane Long, and he has done it. Just a minute to play. That's stoppage time. Here's Letizia. Who better to say farewell than one of the finest players ever to wear the red and white.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to episode 101 of the Saints FC podcast. And tonight I have with me old friend of the podcast and an old friend of Southampton turned foe this past weekend in Carl Anka. Carl, welcome back to the podcast. We've been missing you.
Called me old twice there. I'm not even 30 yet.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Neither Tom and I can talk, so you're all right. You're the youngest man on the podcast this week, although we had an up-and-coming journalistic superstar who was celebrating his 20th birthday with us last week, Carl, so
Wow.
there we go.
20.
Yeah. Do you remember those days?
Barely. I was very drunk during my 20s. Early 20s, I should say.
Yeah.
But, wow, 20. That means your first World Cup that you remember is South Africa 2010.
Yeah, that's probably true, isn't it? We were talking about Theo Walcott, and there's probably hardly any chance that he remembers the early Theo Walcott at Southampton as well. So, you know, there's a lot for him. Anyway, in terms of kind of journalistic reporting. So, Carl, obviously you were covering Southampton for The Athletic last season. You got your big money transfer to head up north and go and join one of the big clubs, Manchester United. Obviously, you left Southampton to win trophies. And you've already done that, so congratulations. I should have introduced you as award-winning journalist Carl Anka, because you're now on the 2020 football blacklist, which I think is a rather good achievement, Carl. So well done on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And to top it off, you've also you're going to be writing a children's book, is that right? With pretty much the most liked man in the whole of Great Britain at the moment, with Marcus Rashford. How on earth has that come about, Carl? And this is your opportunity to give it a plug for our listeners.
Yeah. So I'm going to be working on a children's book with Marcus Rashford. It's called You Are a Champion. It's going to be released in May 2021. I've got to write a children's book with Marcus Rashford. That's really interesting, isn't it? Unfortunately, I can't really share too many details, but I'm really excited to bring this project and hopefully create something that will be of great use for children up and down the country, and perhaps even more.
And have you ever written for children before, Carl, or is this going to be a first foray into that for you?
I have edited and worked on some children's magazines when another life and another journalism career. So I've worked on a couple of children's magazines when I was a bit younger, but this will be the largest amount of work I will do writing in children's publishing to date. And anytime I'm not doing athletic work or watching football, I am now very much reading as many children's books as possible, trying to learn as much about children's publishing as possible, and trying to work and create something that not only is in the style and voice and works quite well with Marcus's wants and needs and when we build that partnership going forward, but also can be really useful to children across the United Kingdom. Okay,
so Carl, you had an opportunity to come back and watch Southampton again in the flesh. I'm presuming you did come back to Southampton because you told me a story about you losing your laptop charger and leaving that in Southampton. So if someone's listening from St Mary's, if they've picked that up, if you could post it back to Carl, that would be great. And Carl, I asked you a question. So, we know that you're a Man United fan, but I think you probably developed a bit of a love for Southampton in the time that you were with us. So, you probably have some warm feelings to Southampton, and you may have had some warm feelings towards your laptop charger. So, if you had the choice, what would you have rather have gone home with last night? Would it have been the 3 points for Manchester United or the laptop charger? Which is more important to you?
It's So you're offering me right now Manchester United with all victory, and I don't get my laptop charger, or you're offering me I'm assuming the draw?
Yeah, I think the draw is probably fair.
I might choose to keep my laptop charger.
Wow.
Not only because I would have had extra, I would have been able to keep my 400-word introduction that I hastily had to rewrite because I jest. It was a cracking game, wasn't it? I've been watching Southampton quite a lot this season, so obviously with the majority of the games being televised near constantly, apart from that pay-per-view section, I'm trying to not watch too much football in case I get burnout. So I'm roughly working on a 2-game a week or 2 Premier League games a week sort of curb, and that tends to be one of them is the Manchester United game I'm covering. Another one now very often is the Southampton game. So even though we're at the 10 game point in the Premier League, there are some Premier League teams I just haven't watched 90 minutes of yet because I'm still watching Southampton play football. I think one of the big learners I'm getting when I'm watching Southampton play is bloody hell, they've improved, haven't they?
Yeah, they have got better since you left, Carl. I mean, that is the that is the thing, and we're not sure yet whether it's because you're not revealing Saints' tactics so kind of overtly in the Athletic anymore. I did have an email from one of our listeners actually. So Gary Seward has written in, and he's talking about really enjoying the podcast, particularly the recent Saints Ultimate Saints 11 episodes, which we have Mick Channon on our most recent episode choosing his favourite ever Saints 11. But one of the things that he picked up and wanted me to ask you about, Carl, was the bromance in the pre-game press conference. He thought it was hilarious, and I think Ralph is missing you, Carl. I mean, have you been missing him? Because it was picked up in the press conference that there's a bit of a forlorn, loving look in the eyes of you two.
Well, first of all, thank you to Southampton Football Club for letting me go into that press conference. I think one of the interesting things about these COVID times and Zoom press conferences is, well, for one, if you're a student or anyone wanting to get into journalism, now's a really good time to just listen and watch all the press conferences because a lot of them are on YouTube now. So if you want to know how journalists ask questions, I'd recommend you'll do that. And thank you to the press team at Southampton, because I'm still on their email chain. They haven't taken me off yet, so I still get invites to all the press conferences. I still get invites to all the press conferences, and the one came up for Manchester United, and I sent them a little email going, hey, do you mind if I just duck in quickly to get one about Manchester United? And not only did they allow me to do that, but unlike what used to happen when I was covering Southampton for the Athletic, so what tended to happen was I used to be the final person to ask questions when I was covering Southampton, whereas this time, at least in the written journalism section, they allowed me to ask the first question. So that's why you got that little moment there where I was introduced quite nicely, and Ralph Hasenhuttl was going, "Who?" I was like, "Hey, it's me." Yeah. I've listened to quite a few press conferences as well, and I think Ralph's little response of, "Oh, why are you bringing no stats?" Because that was very much what we did last season. It would be, for certain reasons, people come into the press conferences and tend to ask questions along the lines of the 9-0 or the reaction to the 9-0, and then they'd ask questions about Danny Ings and Danny Ings' form, and then they get to me and I, come up with my big old truck of stats and go, "So Ralph, what's up with the back post defending?" Or "What's up with this interpretation of Højbjerg and the number 6 role?" Or "Why'd you call your wide players number 10s when actually they're wide players?" And Ralph has always been a very obliging manager when you talk about tactics and you talk about that sort of stuff. I think was really interesting towards the end of last season as well, was he was beginning to correct me quite often, which I thought was quite fun. There'd be times I'd go, "It looked as if you did this for your team shape." And go, "No, I did this," which I always thought, "Oh, okay, well, we now have a dialogue." So I do miss that sort of robust conversation just a little bit.
And have you managed to build up that sort of relationship with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer yet, or is that you still working on that one, Carl?
I'm still working on that one. We had a fun interaction on Tuesday where I asked him what his long-term vision for the team was, and he sort of had he sort of like laughed for a little bit, and he goes, We're going to need the minute because that's a big question. I don't want to answer it right now. And then he gave me a very, very good answer, which was quite nice. And I've written that piece now on The Athletic that went out on Saturday. So, I'm hopefully backing myself, and hopefully by a couple more weeks, a couple more months, I'll have a relationship similar with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Obviously, one of the big things about covering Manchester United compared to covering Southampton was Southampton, you've got a very, very nice collection of maybe 6 or 7 people, including yourself, whereas on Manchester United, it can be 20 to 30 people all trying to ask questions at the same time. Sometimes people are asking questions in different languages. So, for example, just before their Champions League game on Tuesday, a very nice Norwegian journalist came on and asked Ole a question in Norwegian, to which Ole translated back to everyone, which is quite fun. So it's a different environment, shall we say.
Yeah, I was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you about, now you're following a team that has fixtures overseas. Do you, as a journalist, do you have to now watch that on, like the telly, like the rest of us, or do you get a chance to travel with Man United?
So since Project Restart, so since August and whatnot, quite a few. It tends to be dependent on football clubs. So some football clubs in these COVID times only really want to give 1 press pass. Some football clubs give 2. It's very much at the discretion of some football clubs. So, for example, Newcastle United did not give a pass to myself as the Manchester United journalist because they didn't want an increased COVID risk from having 24 journalists when they could have 12 people from Newcastle, which was interesting. Whereas Southampton were kind enough to give me one as the away manager, so I managed to make the trip there. So the first point of contact is always whether or not the club will allow you as press accreditation, and then the second one is whether or not you want to make that trip. So these Champions League away games, it does come up to the question as to whether or not you want to quarantine for 10 days afterwards. So some journalists are doing 1 or 2, 3 big games, Champions League games, and then quarantining, and then other ones are not. So at The Athletic right now, we currently have Andy Mitten, a fantastic Manchester United journalist. He's the editor of United We Stand. He's a contributing writer, and he is based in Barcelona. And due to slightly different COVID restrictions, when he is constantly on the move, he can travel up and down Europe. So he can do PSG, then he can cover Rasenballsport Leipzig, and then he can go off and cover Istanbul Başakşehir. So he was sort of our roaming Manchester United reporter for 2 or 3 weeks, whereas some of us at other outlets are going to cover 1 game in Europe and then coming home and then staying at home for 10 days. So it's at everyone's discretion. I have not done a European away game yet because I would not like to quarantine for 10 days yet.
Yeah, Tom and I have been planning our European trip next season. And, at this point, I'd take a 10-day quarantine to go and watch, Saints versus Hertha Berlin, or Milan, or one of those big European nights would be great to get again. And potentially we're heading that way. Slightly upset by Manchester United and our penchant for still giving away leads and dropping points from winning situations. Let's get into the Saints Man United game, because that's what everyone's here to listen to and listen to our kind of analysis of. I've got to admit, for this game, I only got to see the second half live, which is fairly bad form for me. So I was at the beach and I was cycling back, and I was listening on the radio, on Radio 5 Live, and made it back in time to watch the great comeback and Cavani's fantastic performance. One of the things which they picked up on Radio 5 Live, and I don't know if Tom or Carl, if you saw this as well, but they had a couple of Manchester United fans commentating, and not particularly surprising, but they were looking at how Solskjaer had set up the Man United team. They thought that he'd changed the formation and the setup to almost mirror what Ralph Hasenhuttl was doing with Southampton, and in a sort of 4-2-2-2 or a sort of a 4-1-2-1-2 formation. Is that the case? Because one of the things that they were quite surprised at was Manchester United now mirroring Southampton. They were saying that that should be considered great credit to Southampton, that a big club like Man United would go there with a specific game plan for Southampton rather than just thinking, we're Man United, we'll do what we do and we'll win.
Yeah, so before the game, so the press conference on the Friday, I asked Ollie, about Southampton, what he thought of them, and I said how Southampton are a team with a really pronounced team shape, and they've got a really pronounced style, especially in midfield. And I said, how do you deal with a team that have a physical edge? And Solskjaer gave a really good answer. He basically gave a whole bunch of flowers to Ralph Hasenhuttl and went, yeah, he's a really good manager. He said they're a team that can, I'll get the quote up for you right now, through the magic of podcasting. He said,
I need to bring in some sort of dream sequence. Hang on, let's see what I've got here. That's the searching.
That
for
sounds
some,
like Carl's about to
audio.
murder someone.
he said, he called Southampton a very German team with a very German style, which is always that fun. Like Ralph is Austrian, but continue, and mentioned how in that they have a high pressing style and they can set traps. And then what was really interesting for me was he specifically brought up the goal Manchester United conceded against Southampton in the game against Old Trafford, where Pogba was dawdling on the ball and Romeo and Ward-Prowse just basically nicked it off him and scored a really nice goal. And he said they need to be wise to that and be aware of that physicality. I thought that was a really good answer. And I was also, I said just before the game, I was quite relieved that Paul Pogba was injured and wouldn't be able to play, because Paul Pogba's not a very press resistant midfielder, or is not as press resistant as you would think he is. And the shape, so initially it was a 4-4-2 diamond, and it did slightly tweak towards the game as the game got forward. So it was Nemanja Matic at the base of the diamond, Fred on the right hand side, but Fred tucked in really close to sort of play ahead of Matic, and then Donny van der Beek on the left and Bruno Fernandes at the tip of the spear. And then the idea was to do split strikers up top, and it was okay for the first half. So United mostly contained Southampton, but Southampton was so clinical with their two chances. I think the first half, and I'm a man of stats and numbers and whatnot. You might find a few Manchester United fans say, well, the XG said we should have won that game. It's fine. And I said this before. I went, the XG will tell you that James Ward-Prowse's free kick was not a high chance shot. Your eyes would go, why on earth did Fred give a free kick there? James Ward-Prowse is perhaps the best free kick taker in the league. Do not give a free kick in those areas. So, yeah, Southampton were good. They weren't their usual bright and busy self. I'd say the first 10 minutes belonged to United. The next 20 minutes belonged to Southampton, and then the end of the second half. The end of the first half belonged to Manchester United, and then the changes came. But again, very strange game. I'm really enjoying Southampton getting confident in possession. So whereas before, I think I've been on this podcast talking about how Southampton would have this thing where if the chance wouldn't be on, they'd pass it back to the goalkeeper who'd kick it long so they could reset the press. Southampton don't really do that anymore, but they're just so much better recycling along their back four. And I think Yannick Vestergaard is really important for that as well. You consider Yannick Vestergaard 2 or 3 points last season, looked like he was going to be sold. I think I said I vaguely alluded at one point that I didn't think Yannick Vestergaard was a Premier League quality centre-back, but completely wrong. And I now completely understand why Leicester City were prepared to offer 25 million for him. He is a very good ball-playing centre-back, which you just wouldn't expect from someone who's 6'6".
It's something that I think has taken us all by surprise in Southampton this season. It's actually changed the dynamic of how we play, and the ability to build from the back is much better now, and Southampton are more confident on the ball. I don't think Vestergaard had particularly a great game yesterday, certainly from the defensive perspective, but he's definitely improved the way Southampton are on the ball. Let's kind of we'll enjoy the first half kind of analysis, and I'm going to go to Tom here as the Saints fan. Tom, tell us about the Bednarek goal and the James Ward-Prowse goal. And we've had this debate about the James Ward-Prowse XG for free kicks. It's just like whether you should just kind of quadruple whatever the XG is for James Ward-Prowse, because that seems to be certainly the free kick form that he's got at the moment. And again, this is one of the things that the Man United supporting commentators were just aghast at Fred for giving away that free kick. But Tom, tell us what is a James Ward-Prowse?
Yeah, well, I agree with Carl. It was a strange game of football. The first half was very strange because Saints didn't play. Actually, Saints played, I think, pretty poorly. I think Man United were pretty damn good. And I think Man United's shape kind of flummoxed Saints a little bit. And I think we struggled to get near them. And I think the quality of players they've got, even the players that, people think are a bit slow and ponderous. Like when I saw Fred and Matic, I thought that's great because, one of the things Man United fans say about Fred and Matic is they take too many touches. And you think Saints pressing game, those two sort of slow, sort of ponderous, that's great for us. We can turn the ball over quickly. But Man United were pretty good. But then all of a sudden Saints were winning. And it had a weird feel about it. I mean, it just kind of came out the blue. Saints did with sort of their best to kind of concede goals, and then it was quite an old-fashioned goal. I don't think you see many goals like it anymore, where just whipped in swinger into the near post, and Rashford I think is marking Bednarek, and Bednarek sort of does this sort of like a cobra style shaking of the head, which flummoxes and baffles Rashford. And then just nods it in, and everyone just sort of stops and looks. It was a weird goal to concede. I mean, I think there's an argument: is why is Rashford marking, a centre back at a corner? But it was a weird goal, Carl. Do you think it was a bit strange?
So I remember tweeting about how Southampton had a decent amount of pressure, and I said Southampton are about to have their very first corner in the game. ... And my tweet was, and now they've scored, in that terrible commentator's curse thing. Something I find interesting. Well, Manchester United and their corner defending ability has always been odd, which is one big reason why Harry Maguire was purchased at such a large sum. So they've been quite weak at near post since I think around Mourinho time. So I remember Mourinho mentioning how United under him defended with a mixed zonal system. So you had certain individuals that would man mark and certain zone. Obviously, the majority of the Premier League teams defend zonal. I have no ill bearing against zonal marking, and I think it was just an individual mistake. You put a striker to defend the near post corner, and it went past. One, that speaks to how good James Ward-Prowse's corners are. And I remember after Southampton beating Aston Villa at Villa Park, I noticed that when James Ward-Prowse lifts his left arm up, that tends to mean he's going to whip it near post. So that's a thing you should look out for in future. I've just revealed that, sorry. And when you've got someone that can whip in corners with such good accuracy, it does be a case of, can you get your players to attack the ball? I know for a fact that Hasenhuttl has wanted Jan Bednarek to score more goals from set pieces. That's definitely been something he's wanted more from the Polish centre-back from. I think this one just came off.
It was interesting, though, because it was almost a carbon copy of the goal that we scored at Old Trafford. It was kind of that into the near post, and Bednarek, obviously this time it was scored direct from his header, but you think Man United would have learned from the end of last season.
You would think that, wouldn't you?
I like that disdain in your voice there, Carl. I mean, it's interesting that Ralph Hasenhuttl wants Bednarek to score more goals from set pieces, but maybe he won't now that we've seen that stat being bandied around quite a lot, and Ed Marsh kind of highlighted it to me on Twitter. When Bednarek scores, we always end up leading 2-0 and losing the game 3-2. So I say always. I mean, it's only happened 3 times, but that's weird, isn't it? I mean, for that's not that common a scoreline. And so, maybe we shouldn't let Bednarek score, because I don't like surrendering 2 goal leads and losing 3-2. It's upsetting.
So the last time it happened was the Wolves game at St Mary's, and I remember, obviously in the Athletic we don't do match reports. We try and do debriefs and more in-depth stuff, and I remember going to that game against Wolves going, I'm going to write about Shane Long. The plan was to write about Shane Long and why it was so important. And the first goal was Jan Bednarek. I was like, good. The second goal was Shane Long. I was like, happy days, this is amazing. And then it went into half-time, and then Wolves won 3-2. I was going, for the love of Pete. I think Jan Bednarek scoring might be a misnomer. I think the more accurate thing to do would be to look at how soon your central midfielders get yellow carded. So in the Wolves game, James Ward-Prowse got yellow carded quite early on in the game. I think around like 20th, maybe the 30th minute. And then again, similarly in Manchester United, James Ward-Prowse picked up a booking in the first half. When Southampton's game is relying a lot on pressing and physicality, and Oriol Romeu has been brutalising Manchester United midfielders now for the last 3 seasons and a bit, and has largely got away with bookings. I think a lot of how Southampton play relies on their central midfielders, especially being able to turn over the ball and being really, really aggressive in those central areas, and stopping the flow of games. And when you've got 2 central midfielders that aren't carrying bookings, that's great. When you've got one player that has a booking, that means they can't clang into people as much as you would like. And I think that has a lot to do with these wild swings in form from half to half, because where previously Southampton might be able to calm things down by just sticking a boot in, getting a foul, and then resetting your entire defensive line. When your captain, James Ward-Prowse, is a booking, he can't do that anymore. Is my analysis. It's a theory. Let me know what you think.
It's a good theory. And actually, you know what? With Diego Maradona dying last week, we've seen that goal kind of being replayed hundreds and hundreds of times that he scored against England, you know, that greatest goal in the world ever. And I think maybe Southampton, if James Ward-Prowse and Oriol Romeu didn't have a yellow card, I don't know if that goal gets scored. I think he gets taken down with a tactical foul, and it's a Saints take the yellow card. But yeah, with Oriol Romeu and James Ward-Prowse on yellow cards, Diego Maradona gets through. That's my theory. That's what I've been thinking about this week in terms of the tactical fouls.
John, I don't know if you have seen. Also, have a look for the fouls by I can't remember one of the England midfielders on Maradona during that game. He fouls him. Four of the fouls I've seen would definitely be yellow or red cards, and he doesn't get booked once.
Oh yeah,
different game back then.
He takes a very clear elbow to the face. Just keep sticking. Football. You can't really compare football. I always say you shouldn't really compare footballers from different eras, and you especially shouldn't compare footballers to anything playing now to anything before 1992, because it's basically a different sport.
There we go.
Is my theory.
Premier League era and all that. Well, or the back pass era, whichever line you want to draw. So before we move on to the dreadful second half, should we talk about James Ward-Prowse's free kick? Because it was an absolute beaut, wasn't it?
Yes, let's talk about that one. So I saw Fred give away the free kick and I went, oh, this is bad. And a lot of my thought, I think I said James Ward-Prowse country, which the fact that we're saying that when James Ward-Prowse's manager is Ralph Hasenhuttl and not Ronald Koeman speaks to how James Ward-Prowse has been around for a lot longer than we thought and took a different person to sort out how he would play. Ward-Prowse had already scored against De Gea as well, so I was wondering if that was going to play into things. And yeah, it was a very similar thing. You know, a free kick from that sort of area, and he, you know, up and over and into that near post. I think De Gea will probably be annoyed with himself and would have expected to save that. But Ward-Prowse hit with such dip and venom that not only did De Gea only manage to get a hand to it after it would cross the line, but he also hurt himself, which is that sort of the further annoying. What do you think?
It's a really interesting one. Yeah, I don't know how you defend a James Ward-Prowse free kick. I mean, the wall jumped. Was it Marcus Rashford lied down underneath the wall as well? So
that was Fred. Fred did a little slide down behind the wall. He slides on the wall just in case they tried it.
I mean, that is one of those things I love to see when the free kick goes in as well, because then you think, oh, you've really thought cleverly about how to defend this, and it's still gone in. And De Gea, normally I think when you set up your wall, you're generally quite far over to the other side of the goal because you're covering the side that the attacker can see, right? And you leave the side which the wall is blocking a bit more exposed. And De Gea actually probably stands a little bit more centrally than you normally would, and he still can't get to the ball because Ward-Prowse hits it hard enough and into the corner enough that it just doesn't quite get to it. But I don't know. I think if I was a keeper, I might just stand behind the wall and leave that sort of far side gaping and see what happens. There's
so much space on the far side that Ward-Prowse was aimed to. This is the thing. So when I earlier last season, I talked to Matt Letizia about Ward-Prowse's free kick technique and what you can do. And he was like, no. Eventually you get to a point as a free kick taker where it's less about what the keeper can do and more about just giving the free kick taker his flowers. And Ward-Prowse now is so good at taking free kicks. I'm not going to say England are going to win the Euros because Jack Grealish is going to win free kicks and James Ward-Prowse is going to score them. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's a possibility.
I mean, Gareth.
I think as well.
Go on, Tom. Sorry.
So I think when you talk about Fred fouling and it being a silly foul, it was still a ridiculous place to score a free kick from. Like I know that you shouldn't give a free kick away in and around the box of James Ward-Prowse. Like we all know that, and the Aston Villa ones were the really stupid ones. But it was at a horrible angle, and really James Ward-Prowse had really the width of the ball in terms of amount of space to get it in. To actually score that goal, he only has about the width of the football past the post to get it in, doesn't he? Because otherwise De Gea's got it covered. And yeah, it was a stupid foul, but at the same time, he's probably thinking, like, not many players would probably attempt that shot, and not many players, and even fewer, would be able to score it because it was, it's a very strange angle, and he sort of fouled him in a place where he thinks maybe that's worth. Maybe he'll have to cross this one. But I think this is, to the point about, Letizia talks about it, is what do you do now about James Ward-Prowse? The way Saints play is we will draw fouls in and around the box, won't we? With, players like Carl Walker-Peters, Armstrong running across, Gineppo. They're gonna draw fouls. And right now, James Ward-Prowse, free kick in and around the box, he seems to score, about 20% of them, which is a ridiculously high ratio.
I think the really interesting isn't how many he's scoring; it's how many gets on target. So his on target ratio for free kicks is one of the highest in the Premier League, maybe up there Premier League history. So he's not doing the knuckleball technique, the Ronaldo one. He's not just going for wild power, like a bit. I mean, he's got a similar technique to James Maddison, but he's just so much more accurate with it. And I think what's really interesting is in the last year and a half, Ward-Prowse has gone from taking 40 to 50 free kicks in training sessions to now maybe taking 5 or 6. So he's gone from this volume shooting to just consistently repeat this technique. So he always gets on target to going. He knows exactly how to get the shot on target now. He knows how to contort his body to do it. And now he's going, how do I make sure this goes from being on target to being a goal? Which, that's terrifying, isn't it? He is approaching that David Beckham level of free kicks that we all thought he might.
Exciting times, I think, for James Ward-Prowse fans out there and for Saints fans. I feel more confident when James Ward-Prowse places the ball down on the edge of the area than I do when he places the ball down on the penalty spot, which almost makes me think maybe the way to defend against Southampton is to either give away more penalties or just not have a wall.
Yes, you probably get rid of the wall.
I think he uses it to measure his angles, doesn't he? And that's what he practices, getting it over the wall and then back down. Right, unfortunately, this is the point now where I rock up home on my bicycle, I finish my ride, and I'm here in time to watch Saints seal a famous victory against Manchester United. But I am aware of those
Jonah
ominous sort of stats. We've got the Bednarek goal, and we know where that leads us. And here's some stats. The Saints still haven't managed to stop dropping points from winning positions. So I think it's now 37 points, may even be 40 points. I can't remember when I read this stat. Since Ralph became manager of Saints, that we've dropped from winning positions. 25 points since the start of last season, and 8 points even this season in this relatively short season. So that's 10 games we've had so far, and we've already dropped 8 points from winning positions this season. And I think Manchester United also have won the most points from coming back from behind. I think it's either this season or since 2020. So there was a lot of writing on the wall there. And then I suppose with what you guys are saying about the Saints' performance in the first half and Man United looking better, I mean, I certainly wasn't impressed with the Saints' performance in the second half. Manchester United, as far as I could see, were all over us from the start. We had a Rashford shot with a McCarthy save, and I think Bertrand and Vestergaard had a complete nightmare with Fred, which led to Cavani picking out Fernandes for the first goal. And I just couldn't really understand what had happened, because Fernandes was totally unmarked, but it was, when you watch the replay, it was quite clear that Bertrand and Vestergaard managed to remove themselves from the picture for this goal, which just left us so exposed.
Yeah, it was. Fred did really well so it's a quick 1-2 between Cavani and Fred. Fred does really well to hold on to the ball, so there's a quick roulette, which, I mean, I know this isn't a Manchester United podcast, but I will mention how Fred is getting better as a football player. So that sort of Fred takes too many touches becoming a little bit of a misnomer, and then he plays it quite quickly off to Cavani. And I think what's really good about Cavani's crosses, Bednarek is probably expecting the cross to be played ahead of him and at head height. So Bednarek's expecting a cross that he can nod away, whereas the cross comes in behind Bednarek to the feet of Bruno Fernandes, and that's what makes the goal possible. Cavani as a striker knows the exact sort of cross a striker would need to put that away, and therefore delivers it. Whereas if Wan-Bissaka did the cross, it might not have been a goal.
And I mean, this second half was all about Cavani, wasn't it? Because not only has he set up Fernandes there, he's scored 2 kind of really clever goals later on. I mean, I think the shot that Fernandes fires back in for Cavani's second goal, and he sort of takes a risk and runs at the ball and heads it in. He's almost anticipating it happening, which is amazing, or probably more realistic. He's anticipating McCarthy spilling it and hoping to be there, but then suddenly he's able to adjust his body and get it. And, you know, then we have the numbing inevitability of the winning goal, where Cavani makes a run where he sees the ball before anyone else gets a run on Vestergaard. Bednarek doesn't know where he is. And it's absolutely gutting. And my word, I've not watched much of Cavani, but he is a very, very wily attacker, and he's too wily for the Saints' central defence here.
Yeah, sorry. I think that movement that you picked up for the second goal, so Cavani's first goal, is one of the really rare things you will find from a striker. But the ability to gamble when your teammate is taking a shot on goal and move towards goal just in case someone spilled it. So I broke it down frame by frame from The Athletic, and what's really interesting is as the ball is going out to Bruno Fernandes to take the shot, Cavani is already turning around towards the goal where everyone is looking at Bruno. Have you seen the film Lucky Number 11? It's quite fun. It's got Josh Hartnett in it and Morgan Freeman. There's a little joke in there.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Like Assassins or something.
Yeah.
It's got
a little quote there going, do you know what a Kansas City shuffle is? It's the idea that when everyone's looking left, you look right, or the other way around. And I think that is what Cavani can do. He's done that twice now in those games where everyone is looking for the shot and he's going, oh, there's a chance here. And that's how he managed to steer it down. I also think the angle of what he got on the header was great because he's sloped his body over and he's redirecting the ball at the same time, which, I mean, I can't do that. I can describe it, but if you gave me that cross 10 times to head in, I'd maybe get on target once. So there's that.
He reminded me of John. I don't know when we were at Wembley. You were watching Ibrahimovic.
Yes, sadly.
It just did things slightly differently. I don't know if this is like truly world class. I mean, I guess this is what truly world class players do. But like Saints at Wembley just could handle everyone. They dealt with all of the Man United players except for Ibrahimovic, who decided that actually he was going to win that league title, that League Cup by himself, and he did. And Cavani's impact was almost the same in terms of like it just kind of seemed to scare Saints, didn't it? We didn't really know what to do with him.
Yeah, it's worrying, isn't it? I mean, I guess this is the problem. So Saints have been one of the great pretenders, I suppose, of the first half or the first quarter of this season, in the fact that we've had some really impressive results. We topped the table, for over 24 hours. I think we had a chance to go up to second or third here in this game, which was, I suppose, in the live league table where we were at 2-0 up. But the difference is that depth, isn't it? And it's that ability to draw on someone who's world class from the bench. I mean, even as well. I mean, let's compare the two sort of key substitutes. Solskjaer brings on Cavani and he changes the game. Ralph Hasenhuttl brings on Shane Long, who I've been a fan of for many years. But I mean, Carl, you've picked this up as well. that article that you were going to write in the Saints Wolves game about Shane Long is not even doing the things that Shane Long is good at doing anymore, or is it something else?
So and I will say outside of you, because unfortunately I don't get to watch Southampton with the granular detail that I used to, but from my slightly outside of you now, Shane Long's main expertise last season for Southampton was his ability in the air. So despite the fact he's 5'10", he is really good at jumping. And that sounds really, really simple, but he was really important to get flick-ons and winning headers and help progress the ball up the pitch. And a key part of Southampton, like I said earlier, was if the press wasn't working, they'd pass it all the way back to the goalkeeper, and the goalkeeper would kick it long. Pun intended. And then Shane Long would get the flick on, and that would allow the ball for one of Danny Ings or Nathan Redmond and or Musa, sometimes Boufal, to run onto and to help them get up the pitch. That was a key part of how Southampton played, and it was very much Shane Long was doing the dirty work, so Danny Ings didn't have to occupy himself. And if you go through a lot of the quotes at the time, Danny Ings was talking about how much he liked Shane Long, because Shane Long was beginning to work the channels and was beginning to do the stuff dropping deep. And then Danny Ings would just do Danny Ings things, which is score goals and look delightful. As Southampton have
know
evolved,
that Danny Ings is a far more complex beast than that, Carl. But yeah.
Of course. But as Southampton's style has evolved, and as they've become this team that's way more confident in possession, the uses of Shane Long has gone away a bit. So Southampton aren't kicking it long anymore when they need to reset the press. When they really need to reset the press, it goes back to Vestergaard, and Vestergaard's going, okay, I'm going to assess my options, because not only is he a really good ball-playing centre-back, but he's also two-footed, so he can hit passing angles that a lot of players aren't going to expect from a guy who's 6'6". So the ball isn't being hoofed as long as it used to be. Southampton still played quite a few long passes, but these long passes tend to be quite accurate rather than the long passes that are slightly more speculative at other football clubs. And then when you look at Shea Adams, and Shea Adams is sort of, I don't want to say revival, but as he's adjusting to Premier League football, Shane Long's just sort of, I don't want to say fallen out of favour, but he's fallen in between the gaps. I'd say Shane Long was important for Southampton last season, because Southampton were a team that could have finished anywhere between 17th and 13th, realistically, and they sort of snuck in a bit higher. But now Southampton's aims are, I think their basement now, if Southampton finish at anything lower than 12th, Southampton fans have reason to be disappointed. And if Southampton should probably have reasonable expectations of trying to get into the Europa League. And I don't think Shane Long is a Europa League level striker anymore. I think he is hardworking and he is good in the air, but in a team that is getting better at playing on the ground, and in a team that need, their best form of defense is attack and scoring goals, Shane Long, who is not the most prolific striker and has never been the most prolific striker, he's falling wide the wayside. He will still be very important for the dressing room, and he will still be a very, very good professional, and he will still be, I think, quite an interesting role model for all of the younger players coming through. When you're considering Southampton a big team and all those young strikers that need to learn the subtle nuances of how to prepare for an away game, Shane Long will be important for that. But in the hierarchy, if you're Nathan Teller or Dan Ndulu, you should be going right now, maybe I can get in front of Shane Long.
I do agree. I mean, he just feels like he feels like the answer to yesterday's question, doesn't he? And that's a horrible thing to say. And I love Shane Long, and I've waxed lyrical about. I think he's brilliant. But I think Carl's right. Saints have moved on, and I think, as a ball playing team, we've moved on. And I think what's fascinating is that, we don't have any strength in depth, but also, my God, what must Michael Obafemi have done to annoy Ralph so much? That he can't get anywhere near this team. You'd think Michael Obafemi is meant to be the future, but clearly he's just lost all faith in him.
Yeah, I think Ralph played him, or he was played in a B team game, and then he got sent off. That probably didn't help. And I think it was around those times where Ralph said, he gave his comments about Obafemi, saying he keeps on making it too easy for other people to get in front of him in terms of the pecking order, and I imagine it must be down to that. I'm not sort of done with picking over the bones of what's gone wrong here. Because
Shane Long has 55 substitute appearances as a substitute since March 2017. Would you like to guess how many goals he's scored?
From the substitute appearances?
In 55 substitute appearances since March 2017.
Tom, I'll let you guess because I've seen this stat already.
I would say 3.
You are incorrect. You are too high. The answer is 1.
Yeah. I mean, I see that he brings so much more than goals. I mean, because obviously he clearly does, because as you point out, Carl, he's never been a prolific Premier League goal scorer, but everyone loves him, and the players seem to love him. But, you wonder if, and I think it shows the gulf, doesn't it? It's not golf, it's a chasm between the two teams where, Cavani comes on and we've got Shane Long coming on. And I think, but also I think, maybe Saints need to help themselves a little bit more. And Ralph's obsession with substitutions sort of no earlier than sort of 70 odd minutes maybe isn't helping Saints in a game that was clearly getting away from us. I don't know if Shane Long was the right answer at that point.
And then also perhaps bringing on Diallo in the 90th minute is not early enough for him to affect the inevitable tide that was coming. So if we go over this, because 8 points lost from winning positions this season's not great. 25 points since the start of last season's pretty dreadful, and 37 points since the start of Ralph is a horrible stat, isn't it? I mean, if you tally up even half of those points, Saints are performing at a completely different level, and it's a level that is tantalizingly within reach if we can do something about making ourselves more resilient with a lead. And I'm trying to work out what it is. I mean, yes, we've got the resources question. The difference is that some teams are able to bring on Cavani or Firmino or whoever Manchester City have on the bench that day, and we don't. But I mean, there's other things as well. I noticed Chadams was blowing a bit. Bednarek looked like he was suffering out there as well. I wonder if tiredness is coming into it, which I don't think should be an excuse after we've gone out of the League Cup so early and we're not playing European football. The other thing is that, which I wonder about Saints sometimes, is almost our emotional resilience to deal with this. And, Carl, you've obviously got the very sensible answer of it just being an early yellow card for one of James Ward-Prowse or Romeo, which is probably the correct answer. But am I onto anything with the other questions I'm looking at here?
No, I think there's more than one answer can be true. So I will say squad depth. This is a Southampton squad that probably could do with backup at left back and in central midfield. Is Will Smallbone okay?
I mean, we haven't seen him this season, I don't think.
So I'm genuinely asking: is he injured? Is he all right?
Well,
he's playing for the B team tonight.
So. Yeah. I thought
he's playing for the B team tonight.
The B team lineup today. So we're recording this on Monday, just after Fulham have beaten Leicester. What a season! That B team lineup looks very much like all of Southampton's second string, and it very much looks as if the fact that the under 23s have been rebranded the B team and have been moved, and their games have been moved to days where Southampton's first team aren't playing, looks to me as if Hasenhuttl gone, I need to look at this. I need to look at these youngsters. I need to get a clearer idea of what these youngsters are. I need to make sure the pathway between the academy to the first team is clearer, because I need to sort this squad depth issue, because I'm not going to be able to sort this squad depth issue out with money. He's not going to be able to sort money out. So, a really good example of this is Elyounoussi. Elyounoussi is gone out on loan again to Celtic, where I'd imagine everyone involved would much rather Celtic pay some money to take Elyounoussi, or Fraser Forster, for example, still on comparatively high wage for Southampton, is not the starter. You need to sort that situation out. Or the fact that Southampton terminated the contract of Boufal, where Boufal had roughly 8.5 million on 8.5 million transfer fee, probably had some wages, but someone went, nope, we're just going to take a loss here. So the squad needs a little bit of bulking up. I'd say they are tired, and even though you're playing only one game a week, this is not only a physical fatigue, but it's a mental fatigue. So there's pressing isn't just running. There's more than one way of pressing, and the way that Ralph wants to press is incredibly mentally taxing, right? So the idea of every single time the left centre back has the ball, you need to stand in between the left centre back and the left back every single time. And if you don't, they're going to be able to pass through. Or the idea of when that person runs there, you as a central midfielder needs to run in that certain situation and do that. There was a really good bit. Southampton got some of the ascendancy in the first bit of the second half because the original pressing trap that they set for Nemanja Matic used to be you double up on Matic because Matic is slow. And then partway through the game, you heard Ralph yell at Remey, it's like, Ori, start dropping off. So what would happen was Ward-Prowse would run up to press Matic, and Romeo would just sag forward, would drop deeper, and then sort of drift perpendicular. So the idea was Ward-Prowse would apply the first pressure, and the moment Matic would make the pass, Romeo would pop up and intercept the ball. And that was a really good gap in between, I'd say, the 15th minute and the 35th minute, where Southampton really did dominance because they just sort of flummoxed Matic for a bit. That's really hard to do, and it's really tired to do because eventually Matic will go, oh, this is what they're doing. I need to stop making the obvious pass and hold on a little longer and try and get around Romeo. And I think when you're doing that in the 70th minute rather than the 25th minute, you just get a bit more tired. And yeah, there are things like the yellow card, and I think this, the depth is really interesting. I have not seen enough of Dallo even, I should say, and I think maybe pushing him as a substitute in the 65th minute rather than the 90th minute might work. I did write an article at the start of last season about Hasenhuttl substitutes and how at the start of the season, at least, he was very much fresh logs on at 60 minutes, and he slowly started making later substitutes towards the end of the season. And I pointed out to him in a press conference, and he goes, why are you watching my substitute time so much? Because we're buddies.
I think, John, you're right there about mental fatigue. I mean, it must be strange for Saints because in many ways, like the old Man United team, the great Man United teams knew that being 1 or 2 goals down was no impediment whatsoever to them winning a game. Saints must look at a 2-0 lead, or let me get this right. An opposition team that goes 2-0 down to a Saints team must not look at it and go, the game's over. They must think, we still definitely get something out of this game. And that must impact them over time.
I reckon, even if you don't want it to be a psychological effect, I think it's a thing now where teams are going, don't lose your heads when you go 2-0 down against Southampton, or it's not over until it's over against Southampton, which is quite hard. But again, let's really think about where Southampton were this time last year. So this time last year, on the 30th of November 2019, Southampton were playing Watford in a home game that they looked dead and buried at half time. They were 1-0 down against Watford, and then James Ward-Prowse quick-curled in a free kick, and it was their first home win in the season. So this just shows, one, what a good job Ralph has done. You've gone from weaseling and squirreling your way to your first home win of the season against Watford when you looked as if you were relegation certainties, to now being annoyed that you lost to Manchester United when Manchester United, their exorbitant Copa America winning centre forward.
It is true. I think sometimes we do need to reflect on how far we've come, and also after giving away 8 points from winning positions this season, we're still in 5th.
Yeah,
that's a good place to be in. I think at the start of the season, if you've offered anyone 5th at Saints, you'd absolutely bite the hand off for it, and that would be our best finish. I think post 92, Carl, if we're going to take that as the start of modern football.
You are still in 5th place. Your lead striker is currently injured. Your more expensive summer signing is currently in the wind, furiously downloading Hasenhuttl system. Your other summer signing is yet to be is still downloading the system and is going to be properly integrated right now. You've got someone like Will Smallbone who's still to be integrated. Nathan Redmond is still injured as well. This is the really interesting thing about Southampton. Southampton are, I'd say, quantifiably now a good team. They are, I'd put them well in the Premier League middle class. They're not quite sort of shopping at Waitrose, but they are, I wouldn't say they're, they don't have to shop at Aldi unless they want to shop at Aldi, shall we say.
Unless they're looking for a bargain in that middle aisle. I mean, I think we still do shop in Aldi though, don't we? We're always looking for the European bargain.
I think that's maybe. I think you're buying the meatballs in IKEA. Am I using? Am I making sense here? No. I think this is the great thing about Ralph. This is the fact that he's had one full season and he's got 20. He's approaching his 2-year benchmark, and Southampton have gone from a team that goes into the seasons going, "Oh God, I hope we're not in a relegation battle now," to go, "Yeah, we're going in the Europa League. We want the Europa League."
Yeah, I mean, there was a kind of a set of tweets that were doing the round on Twitter, which were not safe for sort of public consumption, and therefore I didn't retweet it. But it described a night out in Berlin with Ralph Hasenhuttl, which I think that's what we need. The away game at Hertha Berlin, don't we? I mean, it's going to be a wild night with Ralph. If those in the know, and I think we'll leave it.
Ralph at Berghain.
Exactly.
But I think I think Carl's absolutely right, and I think as well there's always a temptation to rush to, oh my God, it's going to be terrible. Vestergaard looks awful. Armstrong, which I actually do believe is still not quite hit top form. But also, look at our next 3 games. We've got 3 eminently winnable games coming up now. And as someone who sat through Arsenal's inverted comma performance last night against Wolves, that Saints will have no fear of going to the Emirates. And I think that's the other thing. We shouldn't get too despondent. It's one game against a team. Yes, they're not as good as they used to be, but they're still a very, very, very good team. And the next 3 games, Saints could pick up 7 points from those games, and all of a sudden it's totally back on.
So, the idea that Southampton now have eminently winnable games. Isn't that great?
I mean, whereas before we were looking at Watford at home just going, this isn't eminently winnable, but it's must win because we're in so much trouble.
It's great.
It is great. So, I mean, we start off with Brighton next Monday, so a week today. Then we've got Sheffield United at home and then Arsenal at the Emirates. Can I just point out as well, Tom, do you remember who I predicted as my surprise for the relegation zone at the start of the season?
I don't, John.
It was Sheffield United, and you scoffed at me. Everyone scoffed at me with that prediction. The writing was on the wall already. I just saw it. But Brighton are decent, aren't they? I mean, they're going to give Saints a really good game. Sheffield United I'm a bit more confident about because I think they're on a terrible downward spiral. But, Saints do love to stop a run, don't we? And actually, probably the game which I'm least worried about is Arsenal. And I think that will be a really interesting marker because last season, that really felt like the game at the Emirates felt like the turning point. And, we were in a horrible, horrible position when we played Arsenal at the Emirates. And hopefully, come the 16th of December, we're going to be in a really, really good position, having picked up a few points from Brighton and Sheffield United games. I mean, Carl, you've seen Saints now in depth this weekend, and you've watched a few games. You think that Europa League or that sort of sniffing around is realistic? Is there anything else that you think Ralph could do to take Saints to a level beyond that? I mean, I think it's a strange season, and I think we might see maybe some of the traditional big clubs falling by the wayside. What would Southampton have to do to exploit the weirdness of 2020 and 21, that we could do without disrupting Ralph's sort of tactics that have clearly worked as a decent foundation?
You need to wrap Danny Ings up in cotton wool, I reckon. I think a fit and firing Danny Ings helps Southampton, and there's a difference between Southampton being a top 10 entity and possibly being a Europa League entity. You need goal scorers, and Southampton were 2-0 up against Manchester United because they were clinical in their 2 chances. They will have a higher position when they have a clinical striker, and at least for 6 months, Danny Ings was one of the most clinical strikers in Europe. So I think that's the basic stuff. I think Hasenhuttl has been quite open in, one, he believes as he calls it, the Euro League. He calls it Euro League rather than Europa. I think it's quite fun. He thinks Euro League is definitely a target for Southampton, but rather one across seasons. So it'll be a gradual development as he eventually gets the squad to be closer to what he wants, rather than one that can happen overnight. But I think there is a lot of good things in this squad, and there's a lot of things in this squad that are obviously improvable, and you can fix that. I don't even want to say fix anymore because I don't think anything's broken in Southampton. I want to say there are things that you can make better, and such as Ralph's qualities as a coach, I'm not afraid that Ralph's the right man to do it. So I think something that all Southampton fans should look for this season are Theo Walcott's quotes, right? So Walcott has been coached by Arsene Wenger, Carlo Ancelotti, not David Silva, a different Silva. He's been coached by Ronald Koeman. He's been coached by some of, one managerial great and a number of managers that have been in charge of some of the better teams in Europe. He's been managed by someone who's now currently managing Barcelona. And I really want to see what Theo Walcott says about what it's like being coached by Ralph, because I imagine Walcott has been a player who very often has been playing off instinct and has very much been coached on his strengths. Whereas Ralph is someone going, you're not good at this thing. I need to be good at this thing. And if you're not going to improve it, I'm not going to play you. So I want to see if Walcott, if Walcott has a moment quite similar to Steven Gerrard said on the Brendan Rodgers. So Gerrard once said he wished he had met Rodgers 5 years earlier in his career. And it wouldn't surprise me if Walcott ended up saying something similar about Ralph. And it wouldn't surprise me if Walcott decided he wanted to stay because he enjoyed the coaching so much. And I think it's that sort of thing. If you can go from a team that has to play Shane Long up front because you need to hoof it to a team that wants to play it on the deck with your 6'6" centre back and Che Adams scoring 10 goals a season, and you can do that over the course of one summer, a truncated summer where you'd normally get 60 days to work with the players, and yet you only had 60 days in between the summers. If you can do that sort of improvement again and again and again, which looks possible, I'm not going to say likely, but possible because of the way he's worked this playbook, then I think the only limit now is burnout from players and burnout from Ralph. It looks as if he's been given enough power to stop both.
Yeah, I mean, the Ralph thing really terrifies me. I mean, in his head, maybe he looks at that game and thinks, it's Shane Long versus Cavani, and perhaps he's reaching the sort of, he's getting the sort of kudos in the media, which means that he is now being mentioned in the same breath as some of the bigger clubs. And my fear is that at some point Ralph will go, I'd rather have a Cavani on the bench than a Shane Long on the bench as my sort of early 30s striking substitute option.
I would disagree. So I think what was really interesting was in one of the fan summits before the start of the season, Ralph used this term. He uses this term quite often. He calls them fantasy players. He goes, I don't like working with fantasy players or considering fantasy players, which I think is his word for anyone who's really expensive. And when you look at Ralph's systems that require loads of running, loads of team cooperation, and basically sacrifice of your ego for the collective greater good, I don't think he wants someone like Cavani. I don't think he really wants someone that has maybe won a World Cup or has maybe won a Champions League. Because when Ralph goes, all right, I don't care about that, I need you to run, and they go, I don't want to, what happens then? I think Ralph works the way Ralph works because he likes those younger players because they're going to buy into his systems. One thing I always said last season was when Ralph likes a player, he calls them open-minded, which basically means he does what he's told.
I think it's an interesting point about the open-mindedness and the fancy players, because I think many Saints fans were perhaps a little bit worried that Theo Walcott might be a fantasy player, this kind of riffing on a good feeling and history and sentiment. And actually he seems to be open-minded and working hard. And we've seen like Salisu and Dale, as you're now telling me that I need to pronounce Diallo's name. And those guys haven't fit into Salisu hasn't had a chance yet, and Dale doesn't look like he's got the Ralph system yet, whereas Theo Walcott seems to be kind of willing and quick to learn, and sometimes his press timing is maybe a little bit different to that of Danny Ings and Che Adams, but bloody hell, he's fit in really well, and that definitely surprised me. Yeah,
I did not see Theo Walcott becoming a serious footballer so quickly.
I like that. From a serious football journalist, Carl Anka. Carl, I've asked all the questions that I have from my listeners, apart from one, which comes from William, which is, I think, a wrestling-based question, which I asked. I know nothing about, so you need to give a one-word answer for this one, because I don't want to alienate all of our all of our listeners in one tweet. But William asks, which Saints player would cut it in a Royal Rumble?
Oh, that's a really good one. Fraser Forster.
Forster, okay. Tom, do you have anything more for Carl whilst we've got him before we have to say goodbye and look forward to whenever it is that we get to play Man United again in the future?
I guess, Carl, what's your prediction for Saints? I mean, I know this is a mad season, but you know this team as well as anyone. You obviously watch a team who are ostensibly better. What's your prediction for Saints? How far do you think they'll go this season?
So at the start of the season, I did we all piled in at the Athletic and we all did our predict the league table, and I, like many a foolish man, predicted Man City would win the title. But I predicted Southampton finished 9th. So I think Southampton can, and they have a ceiling of the Europa League, so 7th place. But I don't think they're going to get there just yet. I think the squad is just a little bit too small. I think the situation at left back is really interesting for me. If Ryan Bertrand gets hurt, some things could unravel quite quickly. But in the meantime, 9th place. Shea Adams scoring 10 goals this season in the Premier League. Dan Ings probably scoring 20 goals again. And then the further development of players like Nathan Tella. Good season. I don't know if you're going to be good in the Cups. So once again, you got knocked out in the League Cup. And I think your FA Cup run will probably end quickly because
Ralph against Shrewsbury Town at home. I mean, come on. Surely we can get through that.
Come on, the Shrews.
Ralph Hasenhuttl never got past the quarter-final, which doesn't sound like a big deal when you consider some of the teams he's been in charge of. But I think that high-pressing game turns things into a little bit too chaotic. So if you remember last season, Southampton didn't draw too many games. So I think high-pressing basically turns games into a coin toss. Because it's either we're going to win or you're going to win, because you're just pressing constantly and it turns it into a to and fro. And when you're doing that constantly, you don't really have a way to settle down or to put a cooler on it when you're drawing a game. And I think that sort of mentality in cup games means you can be a bit naive. So I think 9th place, out the cups by the 5th or 6th round, and everything to go on quite nicely.
And I suppose, seeing as you've not tipped Saints to win the league as the potential dark horse winner, I've got to ask my father-in-law's question. Do you see there being a potential dark horse winner of the league this season?
No, it's still Liverpool. I'm sorry.
I'm a little bit sad about this, but I think it's Liverpool as well. Tom?
I fancy Spurs.
Dum,
yeah.
Dum.
I think Mourinho, this is what he's all about, isn't it? Being an outsider, being a bit of a smarmy git. Kane and Son are unstoppable. I think Spurs are going to do it. I'd love to see Spurs win it. I think it'd be brilliant.
Really? What? Well,
yeah, I've got a lot of time. And Harry Kane needs to win something, man. The guy's an incredible athlete. He deserves to win something.
He would have won something.
He's allowed to win the Euros this summer. That's what I'm saying. That's what Harry Kane's allowed.
Good.
Right.
Good stuff.
Gents, we've gone on a little bit longer than we normally do, but it's I've been really enjoying this conversation, so I'm going to make no apologies to the listeners. Hopefully you may still be sat in your car in the work car park waiting for this to finish before you head into the office, or added an extra kilometre onto your run that you use for listening to. Carl, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back, and I hope we can catch up again later on in the season. When Saints play Man United in the league, and who knows, perhaps when Saints and Man United meet in the FA Cup final or the quarter-final, as that'll be where we'll go crashing out. Tom, as always, lovely to see you, and I think all we've got to do now is listen to those fans that sing us out now. So goodbye, everyone.